Good morning.
Morning.
How are you doing?
Good. How about you?
Doing well. Looking forward to the lecture.
Yeah, me too. How's your trip back?
It was good. I was just glad to get back.
Yeah,
Doing that
great.
15-hour drive all in one day is a little bit rugged, but but it was nice weather last week. So
Yeah, interesting circumstances down there for a while. That was
yeah, it was
nuts.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, it was wild to see that 2 or 3 inches of snow completely paralyzed that
Yeah,
area.
yeah,
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. No, I always think you when I think of you when I drive through Wichita, when I go through
yeah.
that area.
I've been there once in 10 years, which is crazy. I was thinking about that last month that I've hardly made it down there. Just too many
Yeah,
things going on with kids.
right. That's the way it goes sometimes.
So, and then all of a sudden a decade's gone by and you kind of go, whoa.
That 10 years went quick.
We'll see. Hopefully Nayr's going to make it. I have communicated with her almost weekly.
Yeah. Is Charlotte coming today?
I do not know that. Could not tell you that.
Yeah, I just wondered. Yeah, nothing. It's not that she
Yeah.
has to, but I just wondered. Yeah. Looks like it's taking Michelle a bit to connect to the audio.
You can hear me, Michelle. You can leave the meeting and come back. I'll readmit you.
I was going to say good morning to Nayr, but it's not good morning. It's good afternoon to you.
Hi, Nayr. How are you?
Ah, that's better. I can hear now.
Good
So
afternoon.
good morning to you, I believe.
Yes. And good afternoon to you.
Yes. I just thought
I
I'd
have,
log in. Yeah.
I've made you a co-host just now, so you should have screen sharing capability.
Okay.
And then we will give it about 5 more minutes, and I'll introduce you and let you take it from there. During the
Okay.
question and answer part, I'm happy to read questions from the chat. A lot of questions tend to show up in the chat, unless you want to read them yourself. It's up to you.
I think it might be easier if you do that, because
Okay,
I'll
sounds
be
good.
concentrating
No
on
problem.
speaking, and then at the end I might be able to go in, but while I'm speaking, I think I'm not going to be able to do
Sure.
both. No,
Sure.
I'm not. Your multitasking apparently is not a good thing. Great.
Sounds good.
So,
It's early here, like you said, so we'll give it 5 more minutes, and hopefully
okay.
our students start coming in here shortly.
Okay, cool. It's quite early, for them, 8 o'clock.
It is, yes.
Yeah, yeah, thought that would be the case. I was actually going to try and not use my headphones, but it doesn't work. Can't seem to make it work.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'll have to use, no problem. Oh dear, you can see my bin in the back. There we go. That's better, sort of. I'm actually in the office, which I'm probably the only one today. Not only are we having issues with COVID-19, but it's beautiful weather outside. So I think everybody's out skiing. Oh, hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
We set a record high yesterday for temperature, and now we're getting right back to cold this morning. So we had a little taste of summer here the last week, and not so much today.
Yeah.
We're not really there yet.
No, I think it's going to be a while.
Not if you're skiing.
Yeah.
I know. I keep getting all my friends and family. Oh, we've got the sunshine coming out. It's 21 degrees. Oh, look at the flowers. Not yet. We still had snow in May last year, didn't we, Charlotta?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's long.
I was thinking of you this morning, Charlotta, from when I was in Norway last January. Shortly after I left you, you were the first stop that we made. Shortly after I left you in Bodø, I actually had a really bad fall and broke 2 bones and I sprained my ankle. It's like, and so I traveled around Norway the rest of my trip, so I'm eager to come back again in the summer.
Yeah, that's always a good choice. Yeah, summer here. But you're doing better now?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah?
But yes, they weren't bad breaks, but still, the walking moved it for a little bit. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Now the
Those
surroundings
were the good
here
old days when you were able to come here, weren't they?
Right. Seems like forever ago now, just a year ago, January.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic seems very, very long ago. So.
Yeah, it
but
certainly
this too
does.
will pass. Yeah.
It will. It will. We actually have 2 student trips planned for Norway for this coming January and the following January. So we're going to do it 2 years in a row to catch up a little bit. So give our students opportunity to come again.
Yeah, that's great, because and January is when you can do all the wonderful skiing. So I hope you get weather like we have today, you know.
That would be delightful.
Well, I think we will get started. I have students who are in class this morning. This lecture will go on our education lecture series webpage. I have students who will watch later, watch the recording, and I think we'll have a few more trickle in here throughout the presentation. But I will introduce you with respect to your time and let you get started. But thank you to everyone who could make it this morning. I want to introduce Dr. Nayr Ibrahim. She's an associate professor of English subject pedagogy at Nord University in Norway and holds a PhD in trilingualism, triliteracy, and identity from the University of Reading. She has participated in various EU projects on multilingualism, including reviewing the EU's key competencies for lifelong learning in 2018. Nayr is a member of the research group for children's literature and ELT and associate reviewer for the CLELE journal. Her publications include Teaching Children How to Learn, Delta Publishing with Gail Ellis, and her research interests are in early language learning, bi and multilingualism, multiple literacies, language and identity, learning to learn, children's literature, and children's rights. And so we are pleased and very excited, and I am personally very excited to listen to today's lecture. But we're very pleased to welcome Nayr, and thank you for being here, and I'll let you take it from here.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Brad, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. And so I'm going to try and share my screen first of all, and hopefully okay, let's see. And of course, this is not actually at the right place. There we go. Can I just see if we can? Right, is this right? Okay, great. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay, excellent. Brilliant. So, yeah, thank you. Yes, so I'm very interested in, so I work with English language teaching and have done for many years, but I'm also very interested in multilingualism, and that's why my PhD was in trilingualism. And today, that is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about multilingualism and not only multilingualism, but also the focus on how and monolingualism and how we have actually monolingualized our lives and our education systems and the way that we function. But I think it's also
Nayr, can
sorry?
I interrupt you just for 1 minute? Just we can see your whole screen, so your notes and your slides.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, so I need to swap.
I think that's the display settings. I'm trying to remember if someone can jump in. I think up there, I think you can swap.
I can.
Feel like that's how I do it.
It's the meeting record. No, where is it?
For us, it looks like at the top where it has display settings.
Exactly, but I can't see display settings on mine. Why can't I see display settings on?
I think because you're sharing your screen. If you want to maybe unshare for a second.
Okay. So it's still not appearing at the top.
We can see it on
technology. Okay, so what I'll
and it's okay if we can see it. I just wanted you to know what we can see. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's not the same experience. So I was just hoping that we would be able to, I'm just going to try sharing again and see this time, because I have been able to swap and I can't swap this time. Well, I think what I'll do is I'm going to actually switch off. I'm working with two computers and I think that's why. So I'm just going to switch off my laptop and I think that will.
Okay, can you still see my full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time, otherwise I'll just go with it.
Okay.
Okay. What about now?
Now we're good.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, perfect, great. Okay, right. Let's continue. Right, so as I was saying, we're going to talk about multilingualism, monolingualizing processes, and then what can we do to demonolingualize these processes? And that's where I'm going to look at this idea of an 80s model for understanding multilingual classrooms. And so it will be a perspective on how we can actually shift perspectives and help teachers, for example, look at their classrooms and see their classrooms as multilingual environments as opposed to monolingual places and spaces. But before we actually go there, I would actually like to introduce myself again. Brad did a great job, but I'm going to look at it from a linguistic perspective. And I'd like you to look at the following slide. This is a little bit of me and my languages, and I'd like you to write in the chat, try and guess what languages there are on this slide. What languages do you see on the slide? So, because basically these are the languages that I have sort of grown up with, that I've lived with. Yes, you can type them on the chat. So French, Italian, yes, absolutely. The languages I've learned, yep, definitely German. Yep, there's my Portuguese ID. Any others? Hebrew, yes, because of the Hebrew alphabet. And my name is written in Arabic. Those two speech bubbles, that's my name written in Arabic, obviously English, and English is very, very present in the logos at the top, the universities, so it's my work for the British Council. So all of these, and then there is also, yes, Norwegian, absolutely. And that was my first Norwegian book when I got to Norway. I bought The Very Hungry Caterpillar in Norwegian to try and learn Norwegian, which I am still in the process of doing, and it does take a while. Great, we've got Afrikaans, and that obviously is because of my my South African passport. And it's interesting that it's Afrikaans because I was born and brought up in South Africa and during apartheid. So my access to the languages of South Africa were the white languages, so English and Afrikaans. So I was unfortunately not lucky enough to have had access to the African languages while I was actually growing up and learning in school or at university. So this is actually my language journey, my language biography, but also my love affair with languages. I like to think of it as a love affair with languages. And some of these languages I have loved and left behind. And that's Hebrew, for example. I learned that for a very specific purpose. I spent some time in a kibbutz in Israel, decided to learn a little bit. I must remember about 2 words. Some other languages I have obviously maintained a very healthy and long-term relationship with. English, evidently, being one of them, Portuguese, my mother tongue, French. My first foreign language at school has actually now become my second language because I lived in France for 20 years and also studied it. And some languages, we've just become friends, others, I just had a fling with them, and, you know, a linguistic fling, if you want to call it that. And this is an example of how multilinguals function and how multilinguals actually use their languages. And language isn't something that is static. You do not have to speak 7 or 8 languages to the same proficiency. You do not have to have a high level in all your languages in order to be considered a multilingual, in order even to consider yourself as a multilingual individual, because all of these languages have had some kind of an impact on who I am and what I have become today. We talk about multilingualism as if it's something new. Like, for example, my example, I'm very much 21st century. Here I am with all my languages. And a lot of this has got to do with the fact that I was able to, we were mobile, we're a mobile family. You know, my parents immigrated to South Africa. And from then on, you had all these other experiences. Now I happen to be, so from South Africa all the way to Norway. So I've come to the other side of the pole. You know, quite south and now very much in the north. But, and people seem to think that this is a contemporary phenomenon. Well, it isn't, as we know. It is an historical phenomenon. Multilingualism has been around for a very long time. And the iconic Rosetta Stone with the 3 different languages and scripts is an example of that multilingualism, that historical multilingualism. So it's nothing new. Another example, but it's actually interesting in this Rosetta Stone, you've got the 3 languages quite separated in their little spaces. And that is very much how we view multilingualism, as this language separation. So we'll look at why this is only one aspect of multilingualism a little bit later. Here's another example of historical multilingualism, and I particularly like this one. This is Charles V. Now, he spoke 4 languages, and this is what he used his languages for. So I speak Spanish to God. So this is a language of spirituality, religion. Italian to women, or his language of amore and love. French to men, so probably the language of intellectual debate and manly talk. And German to my horse. Whatever we want to interpret that as. The important thing here is how he actually uses languages for very specific purposes and in very specific domains. So his language of spirituality being Spanish, he probably might not have been able to actually say the Our Father in German, but that's actually quite okay, because languages exist and we use languages in specific domains, so we don't necessarily have the vocabulary that we need to talk about certain aspects of our lives in all of our languages. And one example is, for me, is actually the work that I do and my studies and my PhD, which is very much focused on the English language. It's through the English language. And yet my mother tongue, technically being Portuguese, I actually sometimes struggle to talk about my PhD in or my studies in Portuguese, because I don't actually do research or have not had the opportunity of doing research in my mother tongue. So we don't necessarily use all our languages for the same purpose. Now, multilingualism is also, so contemporary multilingualism, you can actually see this example is very much the same as Charles V. This individual, he's a South African actually, and he's talking about the languages that he speaks and who he speaks them with, etc. And he's got Sotho with his mother, Zulu with his father, Xhosa, and Ndebele with his friends and neighbors, English and Afrikaans at school, and now German in the German context. So you can actually see how languages are connected to the person, the place, and the experiences that you have throughout your lives. So you would not have, so Theo would not be speaking Sotho or Zulu in Germany unless he FaceTimes his parents in South Africa, because it's not really the context where you would necessarily need to use that language. So languages depend very much on need and context. So that situated practice and situated experience is a characteristic of multilingualism. but not only. Here we still have the individuals talking about separate languages and using them in separate places. But look at this example of multilingualism. And I think it's a wonderful example of translanguaging, code switching, and how multilinguals actually really function when they use all their languages and when they're in a context where individuals understand their multiple languages. So this is a 3-year-old. It was a friend's post on Facebook, and he was talking about his little daughter. And he says, yeah, every time she looks at my laptop, she goes, Papi, todo esto se mine. And I absolutely love it. It is a perfect sentence in 3 different languages. Spanish, todo esto, se, French, mine, English. So this is not language mixing. This is not the child not really knowing how to use her different languages. This is a child using all of her languages, using her linguistic repertoire to create a sentence in a context where she knows dad speaks both. Dad speaks Spanish, French, and English. So he will perfectly understand what she's saying. So, and this is your multilingual identity that sometimes society doesn't quite understand, because it is actually what causes the negative view of multilingualism in society, because of this mixing, and people assume that it's language mixing, that perhaps we don't really know that having multiple languages impedes the language learning. It prevents us from developing our proficiency in languages, and that is not the case at all. But these monolingualizing processes then started with the not only the perception of this deficit view of multilingualism, but also from a political process. It was a political cultural process where throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, we were trying to create these monolingual spaces by creating these the nation states, and language became this object. It became a symbolic object, a symbolic representation of an identity of this particular political and national space. And so languages became synonymous with belonging and non-belonging, of inclusion and became a weapon of inclusion and non-inclusion, exclusion. And so certain varieties of languages were chosen to represent that particular language space, and all the others were not just excluded, ignored, demonized, but to a certain extent also, extinct, made to actually go extinct in these spaces. So that monolingualizing process then created this negative view of multilingualism, because what we had to do was ensure that the language spoken was that one national language for the purpose of cohesion. But can't we have cohesion in diversity? That's the question. These monolingual processes included monolingualizing education. And here are just some examples of what went on in the 20th century and in schools. Some of these examples are from the 40s and the 50s. And I think if you look at the French poster, it's basically the school rules and what you are not allowed to do. So il est défendu de, so you are forbidden to. And the first one was de parler corse et de cracher à terre. So you're forbidden to speak Corsican and spit on the floor. So we are basically putting speaking Corsican and spitting on the floor on the same level. So this is what we actually considered and thought of the regional languages. So can you imagine children in this situation? And the example, another example, is a little girl with this plaque around her chest. That plaque is called the Welsh Knot. And this was an incentive to force children to speak English and not Welsh. So what happened was, if a child was caught speaking Welsh, they would have this Welsh knot placed around this plaque, placed around their chest, and at the end of the day, they would be beaten So humiliation and shame was not enough. We also had to resort to physical punishment. We may not be in the situation where we're physically punishing children for speaking their languages, but we are still excluding their languages in the education spaces, in educational spaces. And the one at the bottom, this little, so the children punished for speaking Portuguese in kindergartens and maison relais. This was in Luxembourg, 2014, so it's not that long ago. And these were children in kindergarten. 3- and 4-year-olds were actually forbidden from speaking their mother tongue. Children who probably needed to use their mother tongue in order to communicate. Now, this was the surprising element in this particular newspaper article, was the fact that it was Luxembourg, and Luxembourg is an official multilingual country. Of course, there was an outcry and an investigation. The one at the top is the one written in German, was 2020, so not so long ago. And these two 9-year-old Turkish children were caught speaking Turkish in the playground in a German school. And then their punishment was to answer the question, why do we speak German in schools? And the child had to come up with a whole load of ideas. But still, so the message is that it is unacceptable that you're actually allowed, that you speak your own language in the schools. So we can't, so this inclusion of diversity is still, there's still a long way to go. It's not actually happening. It's not the norm. Multilingualism may be the norm in society, but it's not the norm in practice. And you also have, I just thought this one was a wonderful, so monolingualizing perspectives is how people see education again. And this was, I just found this interesting, from the state of Texas in the 1920s. And apparently this is the first woman governor of the state of Texas, which is a yay for women. So we just had the International Day of Women on Monday. So, however, the interesting aspect here is that they were debating whether the children, the Mexican children, should be educated in both English and Spanish, or just in English. And apparently, Ma Ferguson, she was called, is said to have done the following. She picked up a Bible and said, if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for the children of Texas. Of course, Jesus spoke English. We all know that. So once again, there's monolingual perspectives of language. And then monolingual discourse. And this is once again 21st century, and just two examples, one from the UK, one from the States, of how multilingual children are perceived and written about in the news. And even though it's positive, of course, this is positive. Children who speak English as a second language are more likely to improve in primary schools. Yay, finally, we have good news coming around these children, these immigrant children, children who have other languages at home. But when you read inside, look what it says. Some very bright children come to this country or are born to immigrants. Some very bright children, or only some children of immigrants bright? What about the others? Only these children who suddenly got good marks in school? There's still this discourse that puts down the immigrant and his and her languages. And the same in the States. I also thought this was interesting. Once again, positive, statewide tests find ELL's performance better than native English speakers, yet it's a surprising finding. It's still surprising that children are actually capable of learning more than one language at a time if the education system is in their favor, if they are given favorable conditions, and if the teachers are trained to do so. It works. However, the other interesting thing in this particular news is the ever ELLs. So these individuals who have another language are forever English language learners. They are forever something else. They cannot be just simple multilingual individuals who speak multiple languages to different levels and who can function in multiple languages. So the labeling is also problematic. And this
Nayr,
is
can I interject something quick?
Yes.
I looked at a study last year, with the information you just reported.
Yeah.
And maybe it was 2 years ago, but in the United States, researchers were looking at English as a second language or English language learners' scores on national standardized tests, and they were finding that Students were falling, short in both reading and math. Students who were having to learn the second language were falling short of their peers in both reading and math. And a group of researchers, and I looked at a similar study, found that, we were on our test at some point, English language learners move out of that group. They become dual language learners, and they were performing better than their same age peers, which I think is what you were getting at. But I just thought it was a really interesting finding, is that in our national database, English language learners, well, at some point that group becomes multilingual and they move out of that group, and they weren't measuring that group. And when they took the time to measure the math and reading scores of that group, they performed better than their same age peers. So sorry to interrupt. I saw your information and thought it was great, so I wanted to interject something.
No, thank you. That's actually great to know that. Thank you for the information. Yeah. I'm also obviously looking at this from a discourse and a monolingual perspective. So, but yeah, I think it is good to see these positive, not just from the news, but also from research coming out. And yes, as I was just going into the latest one in this is 2021, the census in the UK, and they have one language question, and the language question is, what is your main language? The choice is English or other. So basically, what's happening is, if you don't have English as your main language, you are other. And I can just imagine this conversation, so what language do you speak? Other. What's your main language? Well, other. What's your mother tongue? Oh, it's other. So all the languages, the wonderful multilingualism that exists, and the language diversity is just completely erased from the census. So it's actually a wonderful example of othering languages and othering individuals who have other languages. So the discourse, and there is an All My Languages Counts hashtag actually trending on Twitter, at least in my group of people who are for more linguistic diversity and multilingualism. So the impact of monolingual ideologies has the following. It impacts on how children themselves see their own languages, and how children themselves perceive their multilingualism. And this is from a study in the UK, where it was in 2015, where children's voices were actually, what they were showing was a kind of a negativity towards their own language. So Miss Who Needs the Languages of the Immigrants, this was an Arabic-speaking 11-year-old girl, and the other one, a little 4-year-old boy, and this is what he would say to his mother when she picked him up: don't speak to me in Chinese, because Chinese is stupid. So you internalize the negativity around your own languages and multilingualism in the environment. And this is just teachers in Norway, 2020. It was so uncomfortable, talking about the children who felt very uncomfortable, as if they were ashamed of their own languages. So the messaging, and even though Norway actually has a very positive attitude towards multilingualism, and it's in the respect of linguistic diversity, multilingual identities, it's in the curriculum. There's still a long way to go in terms of training, not just training teachers, but also shifting perspectives on multilingualism and monolingualism. And I think we need a little bit of linguistic activism. And I absolutely love this particular example of what we can do to change. So this picture, I found this I think it was on Twitter. Speak English. So here you go. Here's an example of monolingualizing. This is England, speak English. And then I just love the way this was turned. The speak English was turned into a wonderful call for diversity. We speak Punjabi, English, Polish, Bulgarian, Bengali, French, Lithuanian, Urdu, Romanian, Turkish, Tamil, Cockney, and that's actually where we need to go. So, what do we need to demonolingualize? Well, actually, we probably still need to demonolingualize quite a lot. And I would say in terms of discourse, how we talk about multilinguals, how we talk about education and multilingual education. I think we need to demonolingualize perspectives and how we perceive languages, how we perceive language mixing, how we perceive the coexistence of languages in different contexts. We need to probably demonolingualize language itself and stop essentializing language into and creating language, keeping them in their little boxes. Demonolingualize education, so we are a little bit more open towards different languages in the educational space, and even the self, you yourself as an individual. So seeing yourself and actually positioning yourself as a multilingual, and in a positive way, and so proudly identifying yourself as a multilingual. So the question is, how can we do this? And so this is this is just an idea, a concept that I came up with in order to try and shift those perspectives that we have around multilingualism and make multilingualism a phenomenon or that we need to take into account when we're thinking about education, when we're thinking about creating multilingual spaces, when we're thinking about getting to know our students, what practices we bring into the classroom, what materials and resources that we bring into the classroom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through them, and we're going to look at some examples from my own work and from the work that individuals have been doing around multilingualism in education. So a lot of the examples I'm going to give you are not necessarily new. They are a lot of them are creative examples of helping individuals engage with their own multilingualism. They're not new, they're not an invention of any sort. However, it's how I structured it into this framework so that we can start off by having a perspective, a multilingual perspective, and on education, and looking at it through a multilingual lens. So basically, it's a framework that consists of 8 Ds, and they are grouped into couplets, so into 4 couplets, and each couplet has a specific focus. So if we start looking at the first one, divulge and disseminate, the focus is on the classroom, which should become identity-safe spaces where children's multilingual repertoires are celebrated, as well as those of the parents, the staff, and the community. So it becomes a holistic approach to including languages in the classroom and in the school, where children proudly identify themselves as multilinguals and actually position themselves as multilinguals, and where they are actually able to perform their multilingual identities in the school space. An example on the side is, this is actually from a school in Dublin, where the head realized that there were quite a few, actually there were a lot of children with different languages, different home languages. And she decided to open up the space of the school, and the children were actually learning, they were using their four languages to learn: English and Irish, the official languages of the education, French, their first foreign language, and then their home language. So the children were actually allowed to use and were encouraged to use their 4 languages. And in this case, this is a child with Mandarin as a home language. And she's written, I can understand the question, what are you wearing today? And she's written it in her 4 languages. So, and then and also about the important thing is also to make these languages visible. If you don't see them, then you don't know that they exist. And so the tree on the door allows you the roots of the languages, where you come from, your background, your cultural background. And then these roots actually create these lovely leaves with the different languages on them. So here is an example of practice where the children are given an opportunity to connect with their multilingualism. The linguistic landscapes, I wonder how often we actually look around our surroundings and really look at them from a linguistic perspective. And this was actually in a classroom here at Nayr University, where I was teaching. Yeah, well, a classroom I haven't seen for a while, of course, because we are all teaching on Zoom at the moment. But I thought this was actually lovely because you've got information about the Sami, and the important thing about Nayr is that it has national responsibility for supporting the teaching of 2 of the Sami languages. There are 9 Sami languages, and Nayr is responsible for South Sami and Lula Sami. But I found this interesting in the classroom where you've got 4 posters sitting next to each other in 3 different languages. So Norwegian, talking about the Sami in kindergartens, in English, talking about conventions for supporting and the Sami culture and Sami language, and then a glossary, a pictorial glossary on the side with the words in Sami for clothing items. So I thought that's interesting. You know, are we looking at our linguistic landscape and how can you bring it into teaching and into the classroom space as well? If you're actually interested in learning a little bit more about Bodø, this is an interesting project. I'm not involved in this project. I was actually asked, however, to write a linguistic landscapes, a blog on the linguistic landscapes of Bodø for this project. So if you're interested, just go in and read. But it's very much my perspective of Bodø. Another one is the language portrait silhouettes. You may have come across these or not, but the language portrait silhouettes is basically a silhouette that the individual is given, and then you have to plot, you have to draw your languages on the language portrait. And I particularly like this one. This is a project I did in France with 14-year-olds. They were bilingual English-French, so we're in a bilingual English-French context, but as you can see, the reality is that they had multiple languages and they had these connections with multiple languages. Now, if you don't ask children, if you don't ask your students about these multiple languages and their linguistic connections, then you don't know them. And this one, if you look at it, it was a young 14-year-old girl. She actually has Italian because she simply loves the sound of it. English, she's put it in the place of a heart. It's her emotional language. Moroccan Arabic, as important because it's a connection to her mother, so the person connection. Arabic, just simply because it's her roots. And I love the way she uses a simile, just like a tree that has roots. Hebrew in her gut, and I like how it goes right into her gut, this visceral, physical connection she feels to her, to Hebrew. German, I love German because she says it's in her hand, because hands give orders, and she says she was actually forced to learn German. Chinese, on her shoulder, and she left it behind. So she uses the word metaphor to explain Chinese. And then French, the language of the brain, the one she thinks in, the one she learns in, the one she speaks in, etc. So it's interesting how when you actually when you ask individuals to place their languages in the language silhouette, it gives you a very clear idea of their connections and the language identity. Language maps give you the history, once again, the biographical history of your language. This was, we did some language mapping here at the university in an in-service training, and the teacher went back into her class and she did the same. She drew her language map, the one on the left, and then the children sort of in her class drew their own language map. So you can actually see the kind of a mirror image of the teacher's map, but the child's map, if you look at the end, it's got to be continued. So this language journey, hopefully, has not ended there. You can also plot languages on a grid, and we had lots of fun plotting our languages on this grid. This is mine, and you can see how the languages, the different colors, how the languages go up and down. So sometimes they are used on a regular basis, other times they're not. What impact does this have on fluency? You can see that they have the green, which is my language C, so Afrikaans, has actually lost not only in use, but in proficiency, because I just don't use it anymore. I don't need it in the context I've been living in, yet it is still one of my languages. So another way of making languages visible. And the last one I've been working with is dominant language constellations. And this is a concept that Aronen has been working on, where you where individuals are encouraged to look at their language repertoires and then focus on their language, dominant language constellations. Now, I then went away and decided to get my students to actually create an artifact that represents their language constellations. And this is some of the examples that I've got, which is absolutely amazing. They're wonderfully creative, but also the choice of object, the color, the choice of the shape, the multi-layering is very significant to the individual and how they engage with their multilingualism. And in this case, you've got one example is the atom. So this teacher decided, I chose an atom because I like science. And then she used the atom to actually plot or to recreate this her language repertoire. Ice cream, so it's been wonderfully creative, but it's something that you can really get. And then the teachers, lots of them, what the majority of them say is that they hadn't really ever considered themselves to be multilingual before they did these activities. So, you know, I think teachers need to see themselves, first of all, as multilingual before they actually go into the classroom. So this is what I'm trying to do, is have this experiential, subjective approach to language and to teacher education, so that they experience it themselves before they go into the classroom, and they themselves see themselves as multilingual. Discover and develop, therefore, the next DD is around actually bringing multilingual or plurilingual practices into the classroom and developing the knowledge base of students, teachers, children, and educators by teaching about the multilingualism phenomenon in schools and teaching and teacher education programs, and actively using plurilinguistic approaches and multilingual resources in the classroom. And this is just an example of, we were working around a picture book, and we decided, okay, so it was around Halloween, so how many languages? We took out all the words from the picture book around, so Meg and Mog, around Halloween, so witch, hat, cauldron, cat, and we decided to write it in as many languages as we knew. We've got, well, French, Spanish, and the one within the block is actually Latvian, because we have a student in the class who's Latvian. So we learned a little bit about Latvian on that day. But it's also important to understand and to teach individuals or students that multilingualism is a complex, dynamic, and multi-dimensional phenomenon. It is not neat. It's actually quite messy. So even though I present this like this, I think this is actually the reality. It's all interlinking. It is all connected. Each aspect of our language, so linguistic, sociolinguistic, political, are interconnected and have an impact on the other. We also need to look at multilingualism from a quantitative perspective, which is the multi, and a trans perspective. And I think sometimes the two get mixed up. That multi means, yes, there are multiple languages, and we all speak multiple languages. We can name those multiple languages. The translingual aspect is when you actually get into the code switching, the translanguaging, mixing the languages that individuals, multilingual individuals, like to do. And that we can also bring into the classroom. And I did that by bringing in these tangled translations, where we were working with these two books, and the teachers were asked to untangle the English from the German. Now, I use German because German is a language that very close to Norwegian, and some of the teachers actually had done German as a foreign language, and they had a lot of fun actually untangling the languages. They then went away and wrote a summary of Journey to Joburg for me in English and Norwegian, and I had to untangle the English from the Norwegian, and I had lots of fun doing that as well. So bringing in this mixing of languages into the classroom, bringing in multilingual resources. And this was a project that I've just done with my first years around a bilingual North Sami and Norwegian book, but all the work that we did in the classroom around this book was in English. So we're actually working with 3 different languages in the classroom, and yet at the same time developing English and developing approaches to the English language. And some of the plurilingual practices were translanguaging. They had to write a summary of the text in English, intercomprehension skills. They had to look for cognates, transparent words, like, for example, Norge, which is Norway, Japanese, Japan, looking at the North Sami language and trying to work out the words conferenza, laboratoria. I think we can work those out because these are obviously transparent words. Looking at morphosyntactic elements, like if you look at, they talked about the island of the Bahamas or Otago Island, and the fact that the Bahamas has UIN at the end. We assume that's the plural because Otago Island has OS at the end. That's the singular. So looking at all these elements, trying to work them out just by looking at the language. So konferensi Norge Gamviki, I'm not really saying that properly. That means a conference in Norway, in Gamvik, a place in Norway. So here we have the fact that, North Sami is a highly inflected language, which is not the case with English and Norwegian. So looking at all these elements without actually having to know the language. Sorry, did someone say something? Deconstruct and de-dichotomize is looking at the discourse. So shifting perspectives by consciously employing inclusive, plural, and diverse discourse, and eliminating polarizing terminology from learning spaces. For example, referring to children as problems, issues, challenges, these multilingual children who can't speak, they can't speak English, so, it's a problem. And comparing them to their monolingual peers. We are not comparing like with like in this situation. And some of these dichotomous polarized language also exists in the way we actually qualify language. Now, obviously, we can debate this and decide whether we should or shouldn't, but monolingual versus multilingual, minority versus majority, indigenous versus native versus non-native. That's one I really don't like, etc. Or the language interference versus perfect bilingualism. So we can actually look at these. Is there a different way of qualifying language, of talking about language and talking about multilingual? So we need to question that. And also we need to question how we correct children's language, because I'm just going to give one example. The one at the top, I made some cakes. This was a 6-7-year-old child who speaks English, French, Spanish, and Basque, because he lives in the Basque country, in the Basque region in the north of Spain. And it's interesting that he wrote cakes with an X, because the X does appear quite often in the Basque language. But it's a perfect sentence, okay? So it's not correctly spelled, but is it wrong? Or is it a matter of sitting down with the child and saying, right, some, okay, this sum means that. Now, how do we write the sum that you want to write? Or how do we write cakes in English? Let's look at that. So having a linguistic conversation with them, so as opposed to say that's wrong. It's not wrong. I think this is excellent, an excellent example of sophisticated hypothesizing about language. And that's a 6- and a 7-year-old doing it. The last, so decolonize and duplicate is also about acknowledging language evolution and practices of truly underrepresented but multilingual societies, and integrating the voices from the South and the East to promote equity and linguistic justice. So are we really looking in a classroom situation, so at a researcher level, are we actually looking at what's being written about multilingualism from Africa, from Asia? And do we quote these individuals, or do we just stick to the Europeans and the Americans all the time? But from a classroom perspective, are we bringing in multilingual resources? And there's so many wonderful multilingual dual language books out there at the moment. I've got picture books because I work a lot with teachers working in elementary school, so in primary school. But all of these books have different languages. And all of these books can either be a mirror, so they mirror the multilingualism of the children in the classroom, but they can also be windows into a completely different culture and into a completely different language. So we don't only have to bring picture books into the classroom or multilingual literature, or that represents the children in the classroom. Or we can also bring other literature that actually brings a completely different culture into the classroom. And this is a wonderful example. So I'm just looking at Marisol MacDonald, who is actually, I really like this book because it really shows what a multilingual child is. And Marisol MacDonald does match Marisol MacDonald, non combina, and she mixes everything. So I love green polka dots and purple stripes. I speak Spanish, English, and sometimes both. She has brown skin with a hair of the color of fire. She eats peanut butter and jelly burritos. She writes her name in both script and in cursive, and she loves soccer playing pirates. Why should we play soccer? Or pirates? Why can't we do both? So she's a wonderful example and a representation of a multilingual child. Bringing in this kind of literature doesn't only bring in language, it also brings in knowledge from different cultures and different perspectives. And I love this concept of transknowledging that Hugh, a fellow South African researcher working in Australia at the moment, has come up with. So you're not just, it's not only about language. This last DD, so decolonize and duplicate, is also an invitation to bring in different cultures so that we actually connecting the intercultural and the multilingual lens in education and bringing the two together. So I would like to end with a little pick, one of the drawings that one of my well, children, 13-year-old girl actually created for a study. And what she's doing here is she's written her languages, not only all her languages, okay, she's written I love you in her 5 different languages in different scripts. And then she says that my languages are my confidences, my proudness, my pride. This is a multilingual individual, my achievement. It is my different from others. It is my power. And I just love the way she's actually drawn herself holding the globe, if you look at the bottom here, in her hand, because for her, despite people's perceptions, despite her knowledge and being very much aware that she doesn't have the same, proficiency in all her languages to the same level, it is still an empowering process, becoming a multilingual. So thank you very much. And I think we'll end there. I think I've spoken quite a lot already. So,
a lot of great information there. Are there questions for Dr. Ibrahim? And if you want to post questions in the chat, you can do that. Or if you want to just unmute, that would be fine too.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. It's just that was so fascinating to listen to your research, because, we do think about, we have such a monolinguistic perspective and think about children who speak other languages mostly as English language learners, or English is a new language, and so it's just mind-boggling how you can shift the prism, how you shift the prism so we can appreciate and help children appreciate languages. Thank you.
I'll add a question to that. For our pre-service teachers here, do you have any advice for our teachers for working with students who obviously, have a lot of strengths, but maybe they don't speak English as their dominant language, and maybe they're a middle school or a high school student even who shows up in their classroom and English is something that they're learning, but they obviously have a lot of strength, as you discussed. Do you have any advice for working with those students?
I think the starting point, I think, is always how we make those students comfortable and in the classroom, and how we ensure their well-being, how we ensure that they are part of and they belong in that particular space. And I think a lot of the research that I've shown is actually all about that, is that first initial, integration, you belong, you're absolutely fine. How can we also, then it's how the some of the resources and the activities that I also presented were also very visual. They're very visual. They're multimodal. They are drawing, they're creating, they're actually quite manual, because you create a craft, you create your DLC, your dominant language constellation. And that is something that everybody in the classroom can do. So it's not just that one individual who's being pinpointed, you don't actually speak the language. So that first initial, how can we integrate, how can we welcome that individual? That is the most important thing, number one. I think. And so these activities are all about that change of perspective. The helping that individual with English language is first of all, the teacher understanding that it's going to take a long time. It isn't going to happen overnight. That it's a process. That that individual is going to make lots of mistakes, if that's what we want to call it. That individual is going to, bring in all his languages. That individual is going to feel very uncomfortable, very self-conscious, because they don't actually speak the language of that particular context. In that particular, just the school space, that classroom of 20 or 25 students. Those preliminary, that preliminary stage of welcoming the individual is very important. Then, in terms of helping the individual with different languages, now that's a whole approach to teaching, and it also depends on how the schools are organized. For example, I know that in Norway you actually have these introductory schools where these individuals, a group of children who have just arrived or don't have the Norwegian skills, they can go into those schools, and the teachers are trained to work with those children. Sometimes, in other cases, they actually go into mainstream classrooms. Now, I was actually in a classroom with a group of grade 5 students, and observing my teachers teach English. There was one particular child, she was Somali. She hadn't been in Norway very long, and she basically kept saying, "I can't do it, I can't do this, I can't do this." And I thought, well, really? Because the students had actually taught the whole been through a process. They've done a really good job trying to engage the children. And I said, well, let's sit down and try. And just by giving the child small steps, okay, what about this word? What follows? Lots of modeling of language, lots of language on the board, lots of visuals, not connecting language, connecting words, connecting sentences to visuals, so that the child can understand language through the visual aspect. That's why the visuals are so important. Through objects, bringing realia into the classroom is also quite important. Is also just another way of connecting or helping the child understand what's going on. Then there are obviously the differentiation. I'm sure you're working with differentiation, differentiating texts, differentiating different approaches, the way that perhaps language is introduced. Working with language pairs, that's another way as well, where you can actually put group work or individuals that can work in language pairs. But then once again, in that kind of context, when it's always that one individual child who needs to be, who is receiving the input, because you're the English speaker, therefore I'm going to give you the input. You have to learn my language. You have to learn that word. Now you have to learn this particular context. How about the other way around? How about also getting this child to actually belong in the classroom and to give the classroom something of who they are, perhaps a little something about the language? A project we did once this was when I was working in Paris, was the children had to go away and create some kind of PowerPoint or a presentation about their culture. And this was an incredible opportunity for the children to actually develop their vocabulary, because they suddenly realized there was so much about their culture that they didn't know. And they had to come into the classroom and talk about their culture in English, in whatever level of English that they had. It could be small, just words, or it could be a text, or it could be an oral presentation, but they were given an opportunity to talk about their culture. So I think it needs somehow, how can we also make it a two-way process, so that we also bringing that child's language or background into the classroom and making them feel like they belong, that they're actually important. in that classroom. So, I mean, yes, this could be a whole lecture in itself, or a series of lectures.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback. I think there's a lot of good ideas in there. I think making the child feel comfortable. If the child's not comfortable, they're never going to be able to go from there. So, I think that's good advice. With respect to your time and the students' time, we are past our scheduled time. Are there any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat, but we can't thank you enough for making time for us. With your busy schedule, this was great information. And like I said, I was really excited to hear this information. I have some background in this area, so I've been looking forward to this, but we really appreciate your time. And like I said, we'll have a lot of students who have jobs in the morning or had class today that will be watching the recording of this. And so this is very valuable. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for coming to listen to me speak. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll let you go. So thank you so much.
Okay, great. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.